In the 9th century, Europe bled. The empire of Charlemagne, once a monolith, was fracturing. King Charles the Bald sat on a throne too big for his authority, anxious, exhausted, and surrounded by shadows. His nobles bickered while the kingdom crumbled. Power was slipping through his fingers. But the real threat wasn't political. From the mist of the sun, a nightmare emerged. Ragnar, a name whispered in fear. Ambition burned cold in his eyes as he looked toward the riches of France. Not one ship, but 120. A fleet of destruction stretching to the horizon. Muscles strained against the current. The sound of oars was the heartbeat of the invasion. In the court, panic arrived, breathless. The news shattered the illusion of safety. Wine spilled like blood. The king's dread was palpable. The Northmen were here. The army mobilized in chaos. Mud, confusion, and fear were the only orders of the day. Tactically, it was a disaster. The Frankish forces split themselves on opposite banks of the river, cut off from each other. Isolated by the turbulent water, a fatal strategic error that would cost them everything. Ragnar saw the weakness instantly. With a raise of his axe, he chose his prey, the weaker side. The fleet turned as one, a pack of wolves descending on a separated lamb. On the left bank, terror set in. They watched the wall of ships approach, knowing no help could come. King Charles could only watch. Separated by the river, his command was useless. The crash of invasion. Vikings leaped into the shallows, bringing the violence of the north to French soil. Impact. The shield wall smashed the thin defense. Chaos erupted in the mud. Ragnar fought with deadly grace, a demon of war carving a path through the terrified defenders. The line broke, the river turned red, the massacre was absolute. On the other bank, soldiers wept, watching their brothers die, powerless to intervene. Paralyzed spectators to their own defeat. The river flowed on, indifferent to the slaughter. Silence fell over the battlefield. The Vikings walked among the dead, finishing the work. Ragnar stood victorious, but battle was not enough. He needed to send a message. The survivors were rounded up, stripped of armor, shivering in the cold reality of capture. Ropes bit into skin. The brutality was tactile, intimate, and cruel. 111 men. Ragnar inspected his lifestyle, choosing the stage for his theater of terror. He pointed to the island, a desolate stage for a gruesome performance. The island waited, gray mist and carrion birds anticipating the feast. Ships ferried the doomed, overloaded with souls heading to their final destination. Charles watched, confused. Why were they not asking for ransom? The horror had not yet dawned on him. Makeshift gallows were prepared, silhouettes of death against the gray sky, faces of the condemned, prayer, tears, and the blank stare of shock. A noose tested, a grin of rot. The inhumanity was palpable. Ragnar stepped onto the island, the architect of fear walking among his victims. From the bank, the king saw it. The realization hit like a physical blow. The first man fell, a shadow swinging violently on the ground. Then the rhythm of death accelerated, ropes tightened, Bodies rose. On the shore, morale collapsed. Soldiers dropped weapons, unable to witness the atrocity. Panic took the army. They turned and fled, leaving honor in the mud. Dragged away in shame, Charles looked back one last time. His authority hanged from the trees. The camp abandoned. The road to Paris lay wide open. The fleet regrouped. Drums beat the advance. The target was now the heart of the kingdom. Time passed. The landscape shifted from rural fields to the stone walls of the city. Paris, silent on its island, vulnerable and abandoned by its defenders. Easter Sunday, but no bells rang. The silence was an omen. They docked without resistance, an anticlimactic arrival for such a feared enemy. Ragnar stepped onto the stones. Expecting a fight, he found a ghost town. They moved through empty streets. The debris of panic littered the ground. Doors kicked open to reveal nothing. Frustration grew. Where was the loot? The Abbey of Saint-Germain, Ypres, stood barred. The Vikings knew the church held the gold. Axes hacked at the sacred doors, the sound of violence echoing in the square. Light pierced the darkness. The sanctuary was breached. Inside, gold glittered. Awe turned instantly to avarice. Chaos in the holy place. Communion wine spilled like blood on the altar. Saints smashed. Art and faith shattered in slow motion. Even the dead were not safe. Kings pulled from crypts for the rings on their fingers. Ragnar sat on the altar, weighing a cross, measuring God by the ounce. Night fell. A sickly fog wrapped the camp. The air became heavy with death. The terrifying warriors were reduced to shivering wrecks. Dysentery struck without mercy. Even the leader was vulnerable. Ragnar trembled, spilling ale. His strength was fading. Healers chanted in vain. The shadows on the wall mocked their magic. In the Frankish camp, Charles paced. Advisors urged attack, but fear held him back. No more blood, he decided. He would pay. A pragmatic, cowardly choice. Morning brought the negotiation. A massive scale stood on neutral ground. Soldiers carried the shame of the kingdom in chests. The clinking of metal was the sound of defeat. Gold and silver spilled out. Church relics melted down to buy peace. Ragnar arrived, hiding his sickness behind a mask of intimidation. The weighing began. The beam creaked under the burden of the ransom. Across the land, churches were stripped. Desecration sanctioned by the crown for survival. Peasants were robbed. The burden of the Danegeld fell on the poor. 7,000 livres, a mountain of silver. The scale ticked. Ragnar added his axe, a final insult. Woe to the vanquished. Charles turned away, a silhouette of diminished power. The sick warriors found strength in greed, pain ignored for the sake of gold. The treasury was empty. Dust and rats remained. They pushed off, ship sitting low, heavy with the wealth of Paris. Ragnar looked back, blood on his handkerchief. He realized the cost of this victory. They sailed into the fog, a ghostly fleet, silent and sick. Inside the ship, the legend lay dying, clutching a stolen cross, shivering in the dark. Fevered dreams took him, reaching for Valhalla, grasping only air. The crew knew, morale shattered, gold cannot cure the plague. The map turned grim, skulls marked the route home. King Charles sat alone, holding the last coin, bankruptcy of wealth and spirit. Tools were taken. The kingdom starved to pay the invaders. The scribe wrote Danageld, ink bleeding like a wound on history. In the north, eyes lit up. They saw the gold, not the cost. The precedent was set. Seasons passed. The river flowed, indifferent to the cycles of men. The revolving door, new ships, same transaction. Peace bought, not fought for. Charles aged, burdened by a crown he could not defend. But in Paris, anger replaced fear. The people looked at the ruins and demanded better. A young noble watched, Odo, calculating, determined. Rebuilding began, not by the king, but by the people. Stone replaced fear. Never again. The sentiment was forged in the hearts of the young. But the river held a secret. A massive shadow was forming beneath the surface. Lightning flashed, a vision of a future fleet, darker and larger, waiting in the wings. The king died, the era ended. The crown sat alone. Weakness invited them back. The transition burned. 40 years flew by. The sickly yellow of the past turned to the steely blue of 885. Paris was now a fortress. Bridges blocked the river, bristling with defenses. The Grand Pont, stone and iron, a barrier built to stop the flow of terror. Count Odo stood ready, rugged, alert, a soldier on the walls. Bishop Goslin armed himself, faith and steel combined in one man. They met on the ramparts, camaraderie in the face of the storm. The horizon darkened, the ominous sound of thousands of oars. 700 ships, an ocean of wood covering the river. An overwhelming force. Siegfried sneered. He saw obstacles, not defeat. Rollo watched, calculating. The giant with the sword. Bells rang. Organized chaos. Paris was ready this time. From the tower, the river was gone. Only ships remained. A parley boat approached, Siegfried unarmed, offering a deal. The defenders looked down, unimpressed. Open the bridge, he demanded. We only want to pass.
Paris can live!
This city is not a gate for wolves, Gosling spat back. Defiance. Diplomacy failed. The cutthroat gesture. Tension peaked. War horns blew, drums beat. The water vibrated with the sound of doom. David faced Goliath, knuckles white on spears. The siege began. Rocks flew. Ballisti smashed into the tower. The concussion shook the earth. Impact. Dust exploded. The tower held. A beetle of shields advanced. The testudo formation on the bridge. Loose. Arrows rained down like a storm on the shields. Axes hacked at the base, trying to undermine the wood. The cauldron tilted. Steam rose. The trap was sprung. Golden death poured down. Boiling oil and wax splashed onto the shield wall. Agony below. The formation broke in steam and screams. Gosling fought on the ramparts, a warrior monk with a crossbow. Night fell. Fire lit the battle. The battering ram approached, a beast in the dark. Burning straw rained down. The wet hides hissed, then ignited. The machine burned. Defenders cheered in the orange glow. Siegfried watched, angry eyes reflecting the fire. This would not be easy. Dawn. The tower stood scarred but unbroken. The fleet loomed silent. Civilians rushed to repair. Unity in the face of destruction. Odo smiled. Morale was high. They had survived the first wave. Winter arrived. Snow turned the siege into a blockade. Hunger crept in. Silos emptied. The real enemy was inside the walls. The Seine rose. Violence in the current foreshadowed the flood. The river roared. Debris smashed against the petty pont. Impact. A tree trunk shattered the support. The bridge shuddered. Collapse. The connection was severe. 12 men were left isolated on the far bank. Odo screamed helplessly. The river drowned his voice. Inside the tower, realization dawned. 12 against thousands. The Vikings roared. A pack of wolves rushed on the isolated prey. Smoke rose. They tried to choke them out. The heroes emerged on the roof, banging shields, defiant to the end. Ladders rose. The swarm attacked. The first defender kicked back. Brutal combat, fighting with the enemy's own spear. Time passed. Bodies piled up. The 12 fought on as the sun set blood red. 4 remained, propped up by spears, refusing to fall. The final breach, swarmed by axes. The last man disappeared under the tide. Disrespect, bodies tossed into the river, a savage end to heroism. Odo's grief turned to stone, knuckles cracked on his sword, cold fury. Underwater, they drifted, peaceful now in the current. A blessing from the walls. Silence spoke louder than words. The tower burned in the night, a grim torch of memory. Odo pointed. Vengeance replaced fear. The moral shift was complete. The flood receded. The city was starving, but unbreakable. Empty storehouses, scraping the bottom of the barrel. Infirmary streets. Pestilence returned, striking the defenders this time. Silent cries, eating leather to survive. Bishop Goslin lay dying, stripped of armor, holding on to faith. A final whisper, pointing north to the Emperor. Odo understood. The hand went limp. The funeral bell tolled in the wind. Odo stood alone, cut off by a necklace of Viking fire. Preparation, dark cloak, sharp dagger. Silence was his armor now. Descending the wall, a spider in the night. Touching the mud, freezing in the shadows as enemies passed. Stealth creeping through the camp, dodging dogs and sleepers. A sentry turned, face lit by a torch. Suspense peaked. Takedown, silent and brutal. Breaking the perimeter, running into the dark forest. The journey, riding through rain and mud, urgency in every stride. Arrival, sunlight and colorful tents. The Imperial camp looked like a festival. Odo burst in, a wild man among perfumed courtiers. The Emperor revealed, obese and bored. Charles the Fat looked at the scroll with indifference. Odo pleaded, the court whispered, a nod of agreement mixed with doubt. The army marched, armor shining. It looked like salvation. Montmartre. The Imperial force surrounded the Vikings. Checkmate. Paris cheered, weeping with relief. Pure hope.
Wait.
Panic in the Viking camp. But Siegfried waited, sensing weakness. White flag. Instead of a charge, heralds rode out. Silence fell over Paris. The meeting. Charles refused to make eye contact, gesturing to the silver. Free passage, a permit to plunder Burgundy, political cowardice. Odo raged, restrained by guards, betrayal. Siegfried smirked, mocking the Emperor. He walked out a victor. Odo rode back, a bearer of bad news under a gray sky. He addressed the city, accusing the Emperor. Hope turned to betrayal. The messenger ordered the gates open. Odo pointed his sword. Paris does not yield. Archers aimed at the Emperor's man. Rebellion. The Vikings approached. The portcullis slammed shut. Defenders spit down. Siegfried laughed in disbelief. The bridge remained a wall. Rollo pointed overland. Ingenuity solved the blockade. Exertion, dragging ships through the mud, bypassing the stubborn city. Muscles bulged, a humiliating task for the invincible raiders. Defenders watched, a subtle smile on Odo's face. Moral victory. The Emperor left in shame, humiliated by his own subjects. Sunset, the last ship disappeared. Odo's flag fluttered. Resistance. Aftermath, Paris battered but standing. Survivors looked at the mud ruts. Odo walked the market, dirty armor treated like a king of hearts. Charles sat alone, dropping a goblet. Authority lost. Deposition. The crown removed by bureaucratic force. Coronation. Odo crowned in a fortress. A new era born in cheers. The empire dissolved. France solidified around Paris. Years later, Rollo crumbled earth in his hands. A settler. Treaty, land for peace, no weapons drawn. The kiss, tipping the king over, Viking pride and diplomacy. Baptism, the warlord rose from the water. The Viking age merged into the feudal. Construction, ships became trade vessels, wood became stone. Shadow projection. Rollo morphed into William the Conqueror. History's echo. Split screen. Gold versus iron. Time versus freedom. The Seine flows today. Ripples distort modern bridges into Odo's wood. Notre Dame stands. Endurance on the site of the raid. Coat of arms, tossed by waves but does not sink. Montage of faces, ambition, fear, grit, faith, cunning. The sword sheathed. The parchment fades. War returns to nature, a rusted axe in the grass. Resistance, a sword in the mud. Economy of war, the Danegeld spins. Portrait, Ragnar, a ghostly smile in the mist. Portrait, Charles, tarnished gold in the shadows. Portrait, Odo, stoic against the fire. Portrait, Goslin, faith and steel. Portrait, Rollo, evolution of a conqueror. Ghost ships, reflections merging on the twilight river. Grand Pont today, time-lapse to modern stone. Crypt, the cold face of a king. Stained glass, light projected history. Map of embers, Normandy cools to rock. Shield wall abstract, painted designs. Parisian wall abstract, masonry endurance. Dedicated to the 12 heroes. Europe fades under clouds.